My parents took my sister on vacation instead of me. She ruined the trip and ended up in jail. I'm 23 years old, a woman, and I have a younger sister, Sophia, who's 18. And I swear, she's the walking definition of a manipulative little devil. For years, I tried to open my parents' eyes to reality, but they never listened. At least, not until recently. For context, my relationship with my parents has always been rocky. The reason? They worship the ground Sophia walks on. My mom had a miscarriage before she was born, and that loss really messed her up. So when Sophia finally came along, she became their miracle baby, their symbol of hope, the center of their universe. They drowned her in love and attention, while I was always an afterthought. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved my little sister when we were kids. But over time, I started realizing something. She was a master manipulator. She could twist any situation to her advantage and play the victim like an Oscar-winning actress. And somehow, no one in the family saw through it. Once, on my birthday, my grandparents gifted me an antique pocket watch, a family heirloom. I was over the moon. But, of course, Sophia turned green with envy and started begging me to share it with her. I refused. It was my gift, after all. She tried to get our parents to force me, but since the watch came from our grandparents, they couldn't do much. That night, knowing damn well that I'm terrified of spiders, she snuck into my room and hid a big one under my pillow. I woke up to the horrifying sensation of something crawling on my skin and screamed bloody murder. My parents rushed in, worried sick, but Sophia put on her best, shocked and caring act. Later, when we were alone, she smirked and admitted she did it just to teach me a lesson. No remorse. No guilt. Just pure, unfiltered malice. Another time, when I had a huge crush on this guy Mark, I finally worked up the courage to invite him over to watch a movie. I was beyond nervous and spent ages picking out the perfect dress to impress him. But the second he arrived, Sophia accidentally spilled an entire glass of juice on me and burst out laughing. Humiliated, I had to change. And as if that wasn't enough, she spent the whole evening telling Mark embarrassing childhood stories about me, making me feel like absolute trash. She didn't let us have a single moment alone. When Mark was about to leave, she smirked at him and said, "You can do better." He looked uncomfortable the entire night and never texted me again. That was the moment I realized just how cruel my sister could be. For years, I tried telling my parents about the awful things she did, but they always brushed it off as childish behavior or immaturity. They just couldn't see her for what she really was. Anytime I complained, they'd wave it away, and Sophia would continue being their golden girl while I felt like an outsider in my own family. So, I focused on my studies, got into a great university, and finally moved out. Life was better without her constant torment. But every time I came home for the holidays, she made it painfully clear she hated having me there. She ignored me, refused to sit near me at family dinners, and constantly interrupted my conversations with our parents. She even ruined my things always under the guise of borrowing them, only to break or lose them later. When I confronted her, my parents just told me to get along with my sister. Eventually, I stopped coming home altogether. I made excuses to spend breaks with friends instead. And honestly, my parents didn't seem to care. They assumed I was just becoming independent. They had no idea that, deep down, I was just tired of being the unwanted child. When Sophia graduated from high school, her grades weren't good enough to get into a university, so she settled for a local community college. That meant she never had to move out. Meanwhile, I built a career at a major international corporation in San Francisco and genuinely loved my job. I kept in touch with my parents occasionally, but I rarely visited home. As for Sophia, I didn't talk to her at all. Now, on to the real story. Not long ago, my dad suffered a near-fatal heart attack. Miraculously, he survived and was rushed to the hospital. When my mom called to tell me, I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight immediately and came home to be by his side. After his release, the doctors prescribed him a ton of medication and strongly advised him to start exercising. My dad, shaken by how close he had come to dying, kept saying how lucky he was to be alive. He also wanted to spend more time with the family. I completely understood why he felt that way, so I decided to stay with them for a few days. Thankfully, my job allowed remote work, so it wasn't a big deal. But from the moment I arrived, Sophia was clearly pissed off. She barely spoke to me, and I could tell she hated having me around. I tried to ignore her, especially since I didn't want to argue after everything my dad had been through. One morning at breakfast, my dad suggested we take a family vacation. It had been years since we traveled together, and he wanted to make memories while he still could. At first, I was hesitant, but seeing how much it meant to him, I agreed. As for Sophia, she wasn't thrilled, but she had no choice. Dad planned everything. He booked the flights, arranged the accommodations, and I even informed my colleagues that I'd be unavailable. I was actually looking forward to spending quality time with my family, but when we arrived at the airport, something was off. My ticket had been canceled. Dad and I stared at each other in confusion. He insisted he had booked and paid for all 4 tickets. When we checked the records, we saw that out of the 4, only mine had been mysteriously annulled. As I stood there trying to process what the hell was going on, my eyes landed on Sophia. She was smirking. It was that same smug, victorious look I had seen on her face so many times before every time she successfully pulled off one of her manipulations. I immediately knew. She had canceled my ticket, probably using my dad's computer when he wasn't paying attention. I snapped. I started yelling at her right there in the airport, demanding she admit what she had done. But she just stood there, grinning like she was enjoying the show. I turned to my parents, telling them outright that Sophia had orchestrated this because she never wanted me on this trip in the first place. But instead of believing me, my mom dismissed my accusation on the spot. "Your sister would never do such a thing," she said, shaking her head. Then she added, "You really need to stop being jealous of her. It was probably just a mistake." My dad, though slightly unsure, still tried to justify it, saying, "Maybe it was an airline error, don't blame Sophia." I was furious. They were so blinded by their love for her that they couldn't even entertain the idea that their precious daughter was behind this. At this point, there was nothing I could do. My ticket was canceled, and there were no other flights available that day. I could have booked a ticket for the next day, but what was the point? This was supposed to be a family vacation. I didn't want to travel alone and meet up with them later, nor did I want to spend the trip sharing a room with Sophia, knowing she had pulled this stunt. For a brief moment, my dad hesitated, suggesting they could return home and reschedule. But then my mom chimed in, reminding him how long it had been since they last took a proper vacation. She also pointed out that I traveled often for work, so missing one trip wasn't a big deal for me. That stung. It was obvious they expected me to tell them to go without me. So I did. I told them to enjoy their trip, and without a second thought, they agreed. That was it. They left without me, and I was left standing there alone in the airport, realizing just how little it actually mattered to them whether I was part of this family trip or not. While my parents and Sophia went on their long-awaited vacation, I flew back home to San Francisco. I had no desire to spend another day in my parents' house, so I tried to move past the whole mess and enjoy the rest of my time off. I reconnected with old friends, buried myself in books, and did everything I could to make the best of my so-called vacation. My parents called me occasionally over video chat, happily showing off their trip. It was clear that my absence hadn't dampened their spirits one bit. And while I wasn't exactly heartbroken about missing the vacation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been deliberately cast aside. Once again, Sophia was their priority, and I was just an afterthought. But then, something changed. A few days into their trip, I woke up to several missed calls from my mom. My heart dropped. I immediately feared something had happened to my dad. I called back right away, and when she answered, she sounded frantic. I asked her what was wrong, bracing myself for bad news. Turns out, my dad's heart medication had been disappearing one pill at a time. This was extremely dangerous. He couldn't afford to miss a single dose, and being in a foreign country meant there was no guarantee they could get replacements. My parents searched their entire hotel room, panicking when they couldn't find the missing pills. Then, my mom went into Sophia's room just to borrow some sunscreen while she was out. What she found instead made her blood run cold. Neatly tucked away in Sophia's bedside drawer were all of my dad's missing pills. My mom was horrified. She immediately called my dad into the room. When he saw the stash, something finally clicked for both of them. Their miracle child, their golden daughter, had deliberately put my dad's health at risk. For what? Out of spite? Just to prove a point? My mom's voice was shaking as she asked me what they should do. I told her not to confront Sophia right away. They needed to stay calm, think this through, and figure out how to handle her manipulation properly. If they accused her too soon, she would weasel her way out of it like she always did. But apparently, something went down that night. Because hours later, my dad called me, his voice trembling. "Sophia's in jail." I was stunned. He explained that when they confronted her, she completely lost it. She started screaming, throwing things, and hurling insults mostly at my dad. She accused him of ruining everything by booking a ticket for me in the first place, insisting that I never should have been allowed to come on the trip. Then, she took it even further. She told them that if they kept choosing me over her, she would make them pay in a way they'd never forget. Her rage spiraled out of control, and things got so bad that someone from the hotel called the police. When the officers arrived, Sophia refused to calm down. She even started cursing at them, which unsurprisingly led to her arrest. She was supposed to be released within 24 hours, but my parents couldn't do anything about it in the moment. Desperate to get home as soon as possible, they tried to change their flight. That's when they discovered that their passports and wallets were missing. Turns out, Sophia had either hidden or thrown them away, leaving them stranded in a foreign country with no money and no way to leave. I think that was the moment my parents finally, truly saw her for who she really was. My mom, the same woman who had spent years defending Sophia, was now crying on the phone, begging me for help. She was shaken, overwhelmed, and completely blindsided by the reality of her perfect daughter. I told them not to panic. I'd send them money through Western Union, but they needed to find their passports if they wanted to get home. I was certain Sophia hadn't actually destroyed them. For the first time ever, my parents believed me. They finally understood that everything I had said about Sophia over the years was true. And for the first time, they actually thanked me. They even apologized for the way they had treated me. But here's the thing. Even though part of me wanted to forgive them, I couldn't forget how easily they had discarded me. They left me behind for that trip without a second thought. And now, only after being burned by Sophia themselves, did they come crawling back to me. So now I'm left wondering, do I really want to forgive them at all? My parents have been calling me every day with updates, and honestly, I'm starting to worry more and more about their safety. The day after Sophia was released from jail, my parents threatened to go back to the police if she didn't return their passports. Cornered with no other choice, she finally admitted where she had hidden them. When they returned home, my parents did something I never thought they would. They told Sophia to pack her things and move out. They had finally accepted the ugly truth about her manipulations, her cruelty, and most importantly, the danger she posed especially to my dad, considering she had already tampered with his medication. That of course led to another explosive argument. During the fight, Sophia lashed out, screaming at them, accusing them of abandoning her, and blaming them for everything. She outright admitted that she couldn't stand the idea of sharing them with me. She claimed that my presence on the trip was the final straw, and that she had been pushed to her limit when they invited me. Then, she took it even further. She demanded that my parents cut me out of their lives entirely, insisting that she was the only child they needed. It was in that moment, I think, that my parents finally understood the depth of her jealousy and the sheer hatred she had for me. When they tried to calm her down, she started making threats. She told them that if they forced her to move out, she would ruin them, go to the police, and accuse them of neglect and abuse from childhood. She was willing to fabricate accusations just to get her way. That terrified my parents. Being highly respected doctors in our community, a false accusation like that could destroy their careers, their reputation, and everything they had built. They felt trapped, helpless, and unsure of what to do. For the next few days, Sophia made their lives a living hell. When she found out they were speaking to me more often, she went into a rage, smashing dishes, screaming, and making sure they knew just how much she hated it. She even started hiding their car keys, making it difficult for them to get to work. Tonight, my mom called me in tears. Sophia had another meltdown. She screamed at them because she wanted dinner, and when my mom, exhausted from work, refused to cook for her, Sophia completely lost it. She trashed the house, broke furniture, and then locked herself in her room, blasting music at full volume all night to prevent them from sleeping. Things were escalating and fast. And for the first time, I wasn't just angry, I was genuinely scared. I had wanted my parents to see the real Sophia, but now I feared for their safety. I couldn't even go home to help because I knew my presence would only make things worse. I urged my parents to speak to a lawyer. At this point, legal action seemed like the only way to protect them and restore peace in our family. Update 2. As many had predicted, Sophia got arrested again. And this time, it was inevitable. One night, in the middle of yet another screaming match, she snapped completely. She grabbed a knife and went after my parents. That was the final straw. Terrified, they called the police. Sophia was arrested for assault, and my parents finally accepted that there was no going back. They consulted a lawyer, who walked them through the legal process of evicting her from their home. They filed an official eviction notice, giving her a deadline to leave. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but at this point, they had no choice. They didn't press charges against her, they just wanted her gone. They even posted her bail so she could be released from jail, but as soon as she got home, they handed her the eviction notice. The document was legally airtight, listing all the valid reasons and deadlines, making sure she had no way to contest it. Then, they went to court to start the formal eviction process. It was one of the hardest things they had ever done, taking legal action against their own daughter. The guilt was unbearable for them, but they knew they had to do it. The court ruled in their favor. If Sophia didn't leave voluntarily, my parents now had full legal rights to have the police physically remove her from the house. For years, they refused to see the truth. Now, they had no choice. Sophia is set to move out next week, and for the first time in what feels like forever, my parents can finally breathe. They took a painful but necessary step toward reclaiming peace in their own home. It was a long, agonizing journey, but they're hopeful that life will get better once she's gone. Throughout all of this, I stayed in touch with them, offering as much support as I could. Now, I'm planning to invite them to San Francisco for a few weeks. They need a break time away from the chaos, a chance to rest and recover from everything they've endured. More than that, I want to spend quality time with them, to reconnect after years of distance. Update 3. A lot of people suggested that Sophia might need a psychological evaluation, and I don't disagree. The problem is, since she's legally an adult, we can't force her to get help. And given her violent outbursts, we don't want to push her into a corner and escalate the situation even further. My parents finally arrived in San Francisco, and I could already see the exhaustion in their eyes. They looked drained physically and emotionally. But for the first time in months, they could finally relax. Last night, we sat down for dinner in my cozy apartment, and for the first time in my life, my parents spoke to me with complete honesty. Their voices were filled with regret. They admitted that they had been blind to Sophia's true nature for years. They apologized. My dad, with guilt heavy in his voice, confessed that he should have listened to me sooner. He admitted they never expected Sophia to turn out this way, that they had been so wrapped up in their love for her that they couldn't see past the perfect image they had created in their minds. My mom echoed his words, acknowledging how badly they had failed me by dismissing my concerns all those years. Her voice cracked when she spoke about the pain of realizing how much they had hurt me by constantly choosing Sophia over me. I listened. I let them talk. And then, for the first time, I told them everything. I shared the painful memories, the years of isolation, the moments of humiliation, the countless times I felt like an outsider in my own family. They sat there, horrified, realizing just how much I had suffered in silence. They admitted they had been blinded by their guilt over nearly losing a child before Sophia was born. That guilt had made them cling to her, turning her into the center of their world, while I became an afterthought. Hearing them say it out loud, it was both heartbreaking and validating. I told them I appreciated their attempt to mend things, but rebuilding trust would take time. They understood. We all agreed to work on it together. For now, I just want to enjoy this time with them, to rebuild something that was nearly lost. Update 4. As the days passed, my parents and I spent more time together walking through the lively streets of the city, enjoying slow, peaceful meals, simply appreciating each other's presence. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy. It had been fractured by years of favoritism and denial, but I could see that they were truly trying. And for the first time, I realized something. Their decision to reconnect with me wasn't just about being physically away from Sophia. It was about fixing what they had almost lost. We also talked about what to do next. Sophia was currently staying with a friend, but we couldn't just abandon her, no matter how much pain she had caused. My parents still felt responsible for her, even if her actions were unforgivable. We had to accept the possibility that her behavior wasn't just immaturity or selfishness, it might be something deeper, something psychological. We discussed the idea of a professional evaluation, but again, we couldn't force her into it. The only thing we could do was try to convince her to seek help on her own. My parents planned to reach out to her when they returned home. Me? I had no intention of contacting her. She still despised me, and I wasn't about to put myself in a situation where she could lash out again. Instead, I advised my parents to meet her in a public place somewhere she'd be forced to keep her emotions in check. Our goal wasn't to blame her or punish her. It was to make her understand, to help her see that, despite everything, they still loved her. That we weren't trying to push her away, we were trying to salvage what was left of our family. The main character's sister, Sophia, behaves like a true manipulator and a toxic person. For years, she took advantage of her parents' blind love, twisted every situation to her advantage, created conflicts, and did everything she could to make her sister's life miserable. But the worst part is her sheer cruelty. She didn't just try to exclude her sister from the trip, she deliberately put their father's life at risk by hiding his medication. This goes beyond jealousy or childish pranks. Thank you for your attention. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about this story.